Morning. It's 10 minutes past 8 and we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Good morning, Dr. John.
Good morning, Mick.
It's great to have you here again. Of course, Creation Ministries International has their own website, that is creation.com, where you can go to get pretty much any questions answered. There's thousands of pages of information there. But we asked Dr. John to come in here and answer questions that you ask, and also to talk about the media from the last week. And those questions can be sent through to us on our text line, SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we had a few questions come in last week. One about where does Gondwana fit into the Bible, and another, I'm aware there's only about 30% of the planet is land. If the land was levelled, how much water would be over it? And, that was an interesting question.
Well, Mick, look, I think it's great that a lot of the topics that we've been discussing, they provoke questions from our listeners that are related to it. So what we're able to do is we're getting a bit of continuity from one week to the other.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that question relates to, obviously, Noah's flood. A lot of people thinking, well, how much water is there out there, and could it really have flooded the whole earth?
Well, there is a lot, Mick. And that followed on really because we were talking last week about sea level rise. And so we got that question about how much water really is there on the earth. And I think you mentioned that you'd read some estimates that there's even more subterranean water than there is surface water. So
yes,
there's a lot of water on the earth. And it has actually been estimated that if all the high levels, the mountain ranges and whatever, were lowered, and the sea floor were raised so that all the land mass was absolutely level over the whole surface of the earth, that there is enough water in the oceans to cover the entire earth to a depth of a couple of kilometres.
Wow.
So it's a lot of water, you know. So, there's no doubt that there's plenty of water there, and that really could well and truly have covered the earth at the time of Noah's flood.
Yeah.
And, of course, there's, as far as we know...
And can I just ask, that's not even including the subterranean water then?
That's not including the subterranean water. That's what's already visible.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a lot of water. And as far as we know, there's no other planet in either our solar system or our galaxy or anywhere in the universe that has such a massive amount of water on it. Earth certainly does seem to be unique.
Which is interesting. I remember once you were saying that there is a theory out there that it was comets and meteors that brought the ice to Earth. Does that mean that they only brought them to Earth and it didn't go to any other planets?
Well, we're actually going to talk about that this morning.
Okay.
It's interesting that you asked that question, Mick, because I am going to talk about that in relation to Mars. Right. But look, we also got into a discussion last week about tectonic plates. You know, we do know that the Earth's surface is broken up into these tectonic plates. And there was an article that we discussed last week where there'd been speculation as to how the Earth's crust actually got broken up into those tectonic plates. And the speculation is that maybe the very hot core expanded and cracked the plates from the inside. Yep. And so secular science acknowledges that it probably hasn't always been that way. You know, one time it was a solid crust, and now it's broken up into these tectonic plates. So we then pointed out the consistency of that, actually, with Noah's flood, because Noah's flood talks about how all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Now, it doesn't go into a lot of detail about that, but a lot of the floodwaters in Noah's flood would have come from under the earth, and probably from the cracking of the Earth's crust at that time of Noah's flood. So we then spoke about how that water would have been warm, and we got on to how that could have triggered an ice age, which with evaporation from the warm water and then a whole lot of snowfall, which wouldn't have melted readily, because with all the volcanic eruptions as well, that throws a lot of particulate matter up into the atmosphere, and that reflects the sunlight, and it's sunlight, direct sunlight, that seems to melt snow.
And of course, just to cover that, warm water thing. I know people are thinking, warm water, how would it cause an ice age? Snow resorts are using, lots of air to cause evaporation in snow guns so as they can make snow at plus 6 degrees in theory. So, evaporation does cause cooling, massive cooling, and people can actually have a boiling pot of water, put it in the freezer next to a normal pot of water, and the boiling water will freeze faster than the normal water.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? So even what you observe down in the snow, Mick, is pretty much consistent with the sort of theories that I might add Creation Ministries has come up with. Creationists have come up with these theories. The secular world really doesn't know what caused the Ice Age. There's speculation, but the creationists have come up with a theory that is consistent with what we observe in the real world. But look, a listener then asked about Gondwana, and I think that we'll get onto that when we come back.
Sounds exciting. It is 16 minutes past 8. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Send your questions through 0401 949. Man, you're on 94.9 this morning. It is 19 minutes past 8, and we have Dr. John in the studio. He's answering your questions. Just send them through to 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, you've been talking about tectonic plates and water and ice age and how they all fit so well into the Bible. Well, what about Gondwana? A question we had last week. Where does Gondwana fit into the Bible? Gondwana, of course, is a giant landmass, right?
That's right. It's a so-called supercontinent that eventually gave rise to Australia. A speculative supercontinent because we don't actually know that, but that's what the secular world believes. And there's a couple of things about it that really do fit in very well to the Bible, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. But if we persist with the Ice Age for the moment, bear in mind that the ice sheets that covered the Earth were mostly in the northern hemisphere. We're not so much talking about the southern hemisphere. And all the land masses that we actually observe today probably formed at the end of Noah's flood. Those tectonic plates moved around rapidly, and we got the continents as we see them today. But there would have been a time when the sea levels were much lower. And that is after the floodwaters ran off and formed the oceans and the continents as we see them today. After that, the Ice Age followed, and that locked up a whole lot more water actually on the land in the form of ice.
Yes.
And so the sea levels were lower, so there would have been land bridges and ice bridges which would have facilitated the movement of people and animals throughout the whole world. Because bear in mind that the ark came to rest on the top of Mount Ararat, which is in the Middle East. The animals would have got off and spread around immediately, but it was a couple of centuries afterwards at the Tower of Babel that humans then followed them. So the animals got a pretty good start on the people, and those land bridges and ice bridges would have made migration much easier. And then, of course, as the ice melted, the sea levels rose again. So we have what we have today. But what about Gondwana? Now, remember that this is speculative as far as science is concerned, because you can't go back into the past to observe it. So science believes that was the case, but it can't actually prove it. And what they believe is that the entire land mass of the Earth, actually millions and millions of years ago, was all joined up as one.
Like one giant island.
One absolutely giant supercontinent called Pangaea, which actually means the whole Earth. Right. And then later on, so the secular world believes, that divided into two, a northern part that they call Laurasia and a southern part that they call Gondwana. And that Gondwana actually included South America, Africa, India, Australia, Antarctica, all of the southern type continents. And after that, that separated, and Australia was for a while joined to Antarctica and New Zealand, and then that further separated to what we have now. Okay, well, does that actually fit with the Bible? Well, think about what Genesis says about creation. I think when we come back, we're going to talk about exactly how that does fit with what God said.
Minutes past 8, and we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, who's been talking to us this morning about the tectonic plates, all the water on Earth, and of course the Gondwana, which was, part of a giant landmass on Earth, and the secular view of how it sort of all started with Eurasia and Gondwana sort of all stuck together. And even now you look at the continents and you can see the countries look like a bit of a jigsaw puzzle that can be pieced back together again. And of course the question, Dr. John, was where does Gondwana fit into the Bible?
Yeah, well, look, Mick, we're not saying that the world's view of that once supercontinent continent breaking into two, and then Gondwana, which is all the southern land masses fitting into each other like jigsaw puzzles. We're not saying that that is what did happen, because that is speculation. But when you look at what the Bible says, it's quite possible, because the Bible tells us that when God created the world, it was entirely covered with water. And then on the second day, God said, let the waters be gathered into one place and let the dry land appear. Now, we don't know whether that was a whole lot of little dry land masses, but it could well have been just one big dry land mass.
Yes.
Now, the world believes that the tectonic plates were created from underneath, and then the continents separated. From the biblical point of view, we believe that cracking of the Earth's crust occurred at the time of Noah's flood, and the geography that we have now was produced by those very plates moving, similar to the way that the world might speculate. And then with the floodwater runoff, we had get the shapes that we have now, the valleys, the rivers, and all of those sort of things, and of course the water in the ocean. Yeah. So we're not saying that we take what the world says as being our evidence, but what the Bible says is not all that inconsistent with what the world believes. Yeah. So there are some similarities. So, it's not that we're saying we use the world's beliefs to prove the Bible. No. The Bible says what really did happen, and it's amazing how some of the world beliefs seem to fit in with what the Bible says.
Absolutely. They just missed the whole Noah's flood bit, but the other bits do seem very similar. You are on 94.9. It's 29 minutes past 8. We've got the news, weather and traffic coming up, and then back with Dr. John. Send your questions through 0401 949 949. That is our S9. And we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. He's answering your questions you send through to 0401 949 949. That is our text line. Now, this morning, Dr. John's been talking about the world being inundated with water, where that water came from. It came from the deeps, and there could have been subterranean water, and how the secular model of the tectonic plates around Earth fit so well with the Bible. A question I have, Dr. John, this Gondwana and Eurasia, they're being such a big land mass, and then all of a sudden we believe there was a flood. Now, of course, they didn't get flattened. It actually had the rain come down, so water came from somewhere to flood that land. Yes, we did talk about how deep it would be if everything was flattened, but that water came from somewhere. And of course, theory shows that it could have come from the deeps, and those tectonic plates then started sliding round on top of that massive movement. It all makes sense from a Bible written thousands of years ago, and now science sort of points to so many things in the Bible as being probably correct. But the question is, we believe there was a giant flood, and it all makes sense to us, and it's so simple. But if you didn't believe in a flood, how else do you sort of put that all together? I mean, it's pretty difficult to understand it all moving around.
Well, the advantage that we have as Bible believers, Mick, is that we start off from the premise that the Bible has the true and accurate history of the earth, what happened. Now, it doesn't go into enormous detail, but it gives us enough to know what actually happened. Mm-hmm. Now, because the secular world doesn't want to believe what the Bible says, it has to make up its own story. So it comes up with all of these ideas that seem to make a little bit of sense. But when they actually get those stories properly worked out, what we find is that they're often very, very similar to what the Bible has said all along.
Yeah.
You know? So really, I think as Christians, the take-home message for us is that we can believe and trust what our Bible says. It's never been shown to be inaccurate in anything that it says. There may be speculation by the secular world that it's inaccurate, but there's never been any evidence that it is. And all the evidence that we have is absolutely consistent with what the Bible has always said. So I think that's a great comfort to us as Christians. Yeah. We know that when you're on a good thing, stick to it.
Yes, absolutely.
As they say. But look, the news of late, I mean, obviously it's all full of coronavirus, and, you know, that's understandable because that's what's affecting everybody's everyday life.
Yeah.
But there were a couple of great articles during the week. I mean, we saw the splashdown of the SpaceX astronauts.
Oh, that was brilliant.
That was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was probably better than NASA has been able to do, you know. I mean, those parachutes, they looked fantastic.
Yeah, they were huge.
They really were. And but, of course, the usual thing happens as people go up into space and then come down again. They have to get carried out because they're not capable of walking out under their own steam.
Yeah.
But
well,
least
it got pretty hot in there.
Well, I suppose it did.
It was about 2,000 degrees outside.
Yeah, probably pretty warm. But no, it was a great thing to watch. And, I mean, how good is that? I mean, Elon Musk must be feeling pretty pleased with himself.
I saw the photos of the big smile. He looked pretty stoked.
Yeah. But look, the other interesting item in the news was the unmanned mission to Mars. Right. What a great buggy that Mars buggy was. What did you think of that?
Oh, I thought it was brilliant. I mean, it's huge, big as a car. And I just found it interesting that, you know, this buggy is meant to be used to find alien life.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll talk about that when we come back, what we think they're going to actually find.
Yes, absolutely. You're with Dr. John from Creation this morning. It's 14 minutes to 9, and we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. He's been answering your questions on 0401 949 949. That is our text line. And we also talk about last week's news. And, of course, big news this week was, or last week, was, SpaceX sent another rocket to Mars with NASA. And NASA, of course, have their Perseverance rover and Ingenuity. That's their little helicopter aboard. The rover is as big as a car, Dr. John, and the helicopter's it's about 1.2 metres across, I believe. So they're both pretty big compared to previous rovers.
It's amazing stuff, Mick. You know, wouldn't you want one of those buggies?
It's got everything on it. As far as a gadget man's concerned, man, ultraviolet spectrometers, it's got X-ray spectrometers, it's got a weather station, panoramic cameras, micro images, surface radars, subsurface radars. Even it's got this thing called MOXIE, which produces oxygen from Martian carbon dioxide. So, and more. That's just some of the bits and pieces on there.
Better than a Tesla.
Oh, yeah.
But look, the technology really is fantastic, and they've got that little helicopter drone, and it's really going to have to spin its rotors very fast, as you mentioned, because I think I read somewhere that the Martian atmosphere is only about 1% of the density of Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, well, I read somewhere it's a few hundred times faster than what a rotor would have to spin on Earth.
Well, it's going to have to do something to get lift. And, so it's all going to be interesting. But I think it also said that it's going to take about 7 months to get to Mars. It's quite a long way. So
yeah.
we won't get too much information coming back very soon. And I noticed when the technicians were surrounding that buggy, they were all wearing hazmat suits and so on. So I think probably they're trying to make sure that they don't contaminate it with any earth bacteria, because what they're trying to do is find signs of life on Mars. And I think they're probably fairly confident. They're much more confident than I would be that they're going to find some, and they're going to land it, I think, in a what they think is a dry lake bed or something where there once was water. And I think that leads us into the question, is although they believe that Mars once had water, if they believe that Earth's water must have come in the beginning from crashing comets and asteroids, presumably the same would go for the Martian water. Yeah. And, they believe it had to come from outer space for Earth, because the original Earth would have been too hot to have liquid water on it. So I suppose the same would have to apply to Mars. And even if it did have liquid water, it had to have come the same way. Now, Mars is also a lot further away from the Sun than Earth, and it doesn't have a similar atmosphere to keep it warm. Yep. So Mars is going to be a pretty cold planet. And it's smaller than Earth, so you would expect it to have lost its heat a little bit more quickly. So I think when the information comes back from Mars, we're going to get, again, not at all what the scientists were expecting. This is what we always find when they send a probe into outer space. Yep. And one of the reasons why they don't expect or they don't get what they're expecting is because they don't believe the true history of the Earth and the Sun and the Moon and the stars like the Bible tells us, because the Bible tells us that Earth was formed first, then the Sun and the Moon and the stars, and our original Earth was covered in water right from the very beginning. Yeah. So really, what they're going to find with Mars, I don't really know. But it's going to be interesting. But I can guarantee you that they will say it's not at all what we were expecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to wonder, though, now they've got this little Moxie machine on there producing oxygen from the Martian carbon dioxide. And, the chance of any little bacteria or whatever going up with the probe, whether one day they're going to find something that we actually sent there ourselves and say, hey, we've found life. Because, whilst they're producing oxygen and, the potential of having, there's always the potential of something from Earth being on it because it comes from Earth, growing when it finally gets there is pretty tall, I assume.
Well, whether there's any other life in the universe is very, very speculative, but certainly as creationists we believe that it's unique to Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. You're on 94.9 this morning. It is 9 minutes to 9. You're with in the studio from Creation Ministries International. He's talking about recent news articles and questions that you send through to our text line, which is 0401 949 949. Send your questions through for next week. And Dr. John, it's been interesting this week talking about, I guess everything from Mars to the water on Earth. I guess it's the water on Mars as well, and the tectonic plates and how it all lines up with the Bible.
Yeah, and that's the point that we are constantly making, Mick, that the Bible is true in its history and in its time frame. And there was that other thing on the news yesterday about the cliff that collapsed in Cornwall in England. And it's just so consistent with the sort of things that we've observed here in Australia. Remember the 12 apostles, one of them collapsed down there in Victoria, and London Bridge down there in Victoria collapsed a couple of decades ago. And you see, one of the problems with the world's view of history is all of these things like that cliff in Cornwall and the ones down on the Great Ocean Road, these are all the collapses of sedimentary rock. And these sedimentary rocks are layered. And as the world views it, all of these layers came about one on top of the other over millions and millions of years. Yeah. And yet we believe that they were formed at the same time in Noah's flood. Yes. And isn't it interesting that all over the world we see these sorts of things happening, cliffs collapsing and so on, all in the space of one person's lifetime. I mean, we've seen all of those things. So why would you imagine that they would be millions of years old if in your lifetime you see it all happening before your very eyes?
Yes.
The biblical time frame of only a matter of thousands of years ago is much more comprehensible than the world's time frame of millions and billions of years.
Yes, absolutely. It definitely makes sense. The Bible makes sense. It's just interesting. Every week we talk about, so many scientific discoveries that they've found in previous weeks, and so many times they sort of discount theories of old from the scientists. Yet what they do keep coming up with is stuff that lines up with the Bible, unless it's one of their new theories that's just come out to try and, cover up the old theory that they say didn't work anymore. However, the biblical account of what happened so lines up with the Bible. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Absolutely
and
amazing.
it never changes, Mick. And look, if I can encourage our listeners too, we really want to address your questions. So don't phone them in, text them in to our text line 0401 949 949. We really want to hear from you, and we will answer all of your questions.
Absolutely. Now, of course, Dr. John, Creation Ministries also has a website. Of course, we'd like people to text their questions through, but that website, creation.com, it has got so much information on it. And, of course, people who have questions, they can go there pretty much any time and get their questions answered. Yeah,
there's thousands of articles on that, Mick, and they will answer all of your questions. But, as you've said many times, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd like to be able to answer them on air, because if you've got a question, others have got the same question. So let's hear from you on our text line.
Absolutely. 0401 949 949. And finally, Dr. John, you bring some magazines in here sometimes, which you allow us to give out to people.
Absolutely. We've got some back issues of Creation magazine. If you'd like to have a look at that, come on in here and get one, and we'll make sure that the supply is kept up.
Yeah, they're amazing magazines. I've pushed through them myself. Some unbelievable articles, but they're true. You sort of read through them, and Creation Ministries has so many scientists, so many people that are experts in their field writing these articles. It's good to see that there's real truth in there and real science written in to those magazines that support the Bible 100%.
And people can subscribe to it by going to that website and taking out a subscription to the magazine. I can promise you would never be disappointed if you took out a subscription.
Absolutely.